You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market for your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com. And we are back for another installment of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Dern. You can find me on Twitter at KevinMD4. Got my co-pilot here, Evan Morris, joining us on the show today. Evan, say hello to the people.
Guess who's back? I'm back. All right.
So we wanted to do an episode kind of, since we've had some pretty big news, and unless you've been living under a rock, you know what that big news is as it relates to numero uno, Tua Tagovailoa. The contract is done. So we're going to talk about that today, as well as kind of go through a little bit of a training camp preview. But first, Evan is going to take us back down Dolphins memory lane with another segment of Where Are They Now?
Well, first off, Kev, what do you mean? The big news is we signed Emmanuel Ogbah, not the Tua deal. we brought 91 home.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
That's horrible. Saying we brought 91 home, that's just sacrilege because that should be Cam Wake.
You said it, not me.
Yeah, so. That's bad. No, I kid. We'll spend a lot of time on the Tua deal, but first, of course, we got to get to our third.
Yeah.
Where Are They Now segment. So initially, I was going to go with Jeremiah Bell or Brian Cox because we spent the first two on the offensive side of the ball with wide receivers. So wanted to go defense this time. Couldn't really find anything very interesting on Jeremiah Bell or Brian Cox, both great players from their respective eras because Cox was in the 90s. He's, for the younger fans, he's the famous video of the guy coming out of the tunnel with the double birds at the Bills fans.
That's him.
Is there some more background to that story that I don't know?
Not that I know of. There's also a great clip. They played the Bengals on Sunday Night Football. I want to say it was in like 92 or 93. And Brian Cox basically tried to fight the entire Bengals like bench. So he was a pretty badass dude and played in the NFL for a long time. So, but I'm pretty stoked about who you picked. I'll let you reveal that. But this is one of the more, I think, underrated players that we had in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. So Evan, why don't you tell the folks who we've got this week?
Well, what a great segue. So we are going with not the 94 that many of us are used to, but the 94 from previously. And that is Randy Starks Jr., actually. So we'll jump into it here. Randy Starks Jr., he spent the first 5 years of his life in Germany, actually, because Senior was stationed there in the Army. And then fast forward, Randy Starks went to high school in Maryland, went on to play for the University of Maryland, even though I think he was recruited by Penn State and some larger colleges or more, just bigger programs. Ended up being drafted by the Titans in the third round, but then he played for the Dolphins from 2008 until the 2015 season. And during those 7 seasons, Kevin can attest, this is when I was really getting into watching the Dolphins. He was kind of a staple in that D-line. He's pretty impactful. He averaged 4.5 sacks a season pretty much, and he had 4 interceptions as a D lineman over 7 seasons, which was.
Yeah, if I remember right, I think at the time he was the strongest guy on the team with all their weight room records. Like he was a badass dude.
He was a load, yeah, and he got 4 picks, which I don't understand, but hey, more power to him, the big fella. And in 2012, that'd be I think his 4th season with the team. He joined. Here we are, the legendary Cam Wake, as the first 2 players in Dolphins history to earn Pro Bowl honors at 2 different positions, which for Starks was nose tackle and D end. And then post NFL, following a little bit of a theme we've got between him, Ted Ginn Jr., and Brian Hartline, he's gone into coaching, but also his own education. So we got a master's in sports management from Georgetown University and is currently pursuing a PhD in exercise and sports science at Liberty University. And on top of that, he's coached high school in Virginia and then Georgia. And he's now in his first year as the head coach at Eureka College in Illinois. It's a D3 program down there. And it's actually where Ronald Reagan went to college, believe it or not. I'd never really heard of it. But so we here at Dolphins Talk wish Coach Starks the best at his inaugural season at Eureka. So anyway, that's all I got for Randy Starks, Dolphins legend. And Kevin, it sounds like you've got an anecdote, which I was hoping you would because you're 3 for 3 now.
Oh no, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize he had gone into coaching, but I just remember, I think, if I remember correctly, he was the first player in the NFL drafted at only 20 years old. So kind of like the Austin Jackson situation before Austin Jackson. He might have even been 19 and turned 20 before the season started. Like he was really young when he came into the NFL with the Tennessee Titans. So pretty underrated player back in the Sperano era, and I guess into a little of the Joe Philbin era. Badass dude though. Good player.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, fun to watch. It was him and I looked at Paul Soliai as well, Jared Odrick, where I just remember those guys, and Cam Wake, obviously. I remember a lot of those guys when I was a younger fan.
I remember more so like the Sperano era when you had like Kendall Langford and Randy Starks were up front. With Soliai was there. They had Jason Ferguson for a minute. Vonnie Holiday was still there. And then they had, I think, Matt Roth. My name is Matt. God damn it, Matt. If you've ever followed the Seth Levitt and OJ McDuffie, the Fish Tank show, you'll get the good Channing Crowder story behind Matt Roth and how crazy he was. But yeah, let's dive into more important current matters, and that is the quarterback of the Miami Dolphins received an extension on Friday. Evan's got some of those key figures and details broken down, so I'm going to let Evan talk through kind of the high bullet points, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of it a little bit.
Yeah. So Kevin's got this outline up with me. I've got notes upon notes. I stayed up real late working on what the important parts of this contract, because I think people get too hyper focused on parts of contracts that don't matter too much. And those are the numbers that the media likes to talk about because they're the biggest numbers, i.e. the average, or not even the average, the total dollar amount that a contract is worth as opposed to the guaranteed money. So Tua's deal was a 4-year, $212.4 million extension. That's kind of the overarching number for the contract. The key figures are the average annual value of $53.1 million. That clocks in 4th in the NFL. And I would argue that the far more important number, $167 million guaranteed, fully guaranteed. And that clocks in at 8th in the NFL. So he's lower on the guaranteed scale than he is in the average scale. Top-down view as far as negotiations go, because Kevin, I don't know about you, but I was definitely getting some ants in my pants about this negotiation going into training camp. You seemed more calm and collected about it than me. I was a little bit nervous, and you could just tell it was weighing on the team a little bit. But they get the deal done, and it's team-friendly in the sense that Tua checks in below Jordan Love's contract in terms of annual value, even though Jordan Love, he started like 8 games, and he was really good last year. But it's crazy. They got the contract done with the same agency. It was Athletes First, did both deals, and they got it done for less average annual value. So that's a win for the team. But then Tua wins in the sense that he gets a relatively large amount of guaranteed money, considering it's a 4-year deal that he signed compared to a 5-year deal, which is the length of the deals that people like Burrow, Lawrence, Goff, Herbert, Hurts, and Lamar Jackson, all of those guys, they signed 5-year deals. And Tua is still pretty competitive in the guaranteed money with a whole 1 less year on his deal. That's good for Tua. So hence the $167 million guaranteed. And then lastly, for my intro to the contract for everybody, on a team-friendly note, if you're worried about the contract and you think that we overpaid Tua, which I'm going to get into that. I'm probably going to jump on my soapbox more later. But the Fins have their first potential out following the 2026 season. That's barring any restructures. So if nothing changes, the team is tied to Tua for 2024, 2025, and 2026. You've got 3 seasons pretty much guaranteed with him. And then after that, you can assess and see where the contract is at. And if things have gone poorly, you can get out. You incur some dead cap, but it's you could stomach it at that point.
Yeah.
those are the high points. Kevin, I guess, what is your take overall before I get into some of the other notes I have on the contract?
So first, I'll give a shout out. If you really want to dive into this contract and like the nitty gritty details of it, Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphin did an episode yesterday, which is now live on YouTube, where he basically goes through year by year of the contract. It's like a 25-minute episode. If you really want to learn more about like how the CBA works with these contracts and how the teams can move money, watch that episode. Kyle did a fantastic job breaking it down. So that's my shout out. Overall, and I mean this in the best sense possible, like a lot of times people will talk about, well, the team, air quotes, won, or the player won. In the best sense possible, I don't really think either side won. I think it's a pretty amicable deal for both parties because there are some things baked in. It's basically a 1 year plus 4 contract. So Tua is getting a giant signing bonus for the 2024 season that goes with his 23 point whatever million he was getting on the 5th year option. That bonus is prorated throughout the contract. So he's getting, I think it's 8.4 and change million from that bonus each of the 5 years. Well, each of the 5 years. So starting 2024 through the end of that contract in 2028, he gets that bonus broken down. Now there's some other cool things kind of baked into it. Let's say, and not that I'm, knock on wood, Tua tears an ACL this year. He gets some injury guaranteed money that is baked into it in 2026. So he's protected should some sort of like long-term injury befall him. There's also a pretty cool thing where next year, and this is the only year within the contract that it has, he gets a $25 million roster bonus when the league year tolls, which is usually like March 10th, somewhere around there, like right around when the combine takes place. You can prorate that bonus to the remaining 4 years of that contract. So that does give you a little bit more cap space flexibility. So let's say rather than paying, that 25 million, now you've got some extra room if you want to redo Tyreek Hill's deal, or you can move some of that money around to say sign like Javon Holland to a contract extension. The other cool note of it is at least for Tua's side, if he's still on the roster, which by all accounts he would be, in March of 2025, his money for 2026 becomes fully vested and guaranteed. 2026 is the big year because he's due 63.4 million of the total money that cash flow comes into him that year. So as Evan mentioned before, that kind of starts the air quotes again, the exit ramp to the contract. So if the team wants to move on from him, it makes zero financial sense to do it after 2025. You could, but about the only way you're going to do it is to trade him and eat a shit ton of dead cap money, which you wouldn't want to do. So really the exit ramp kind of starts in 2026. Now, the interesting thing is after 2026, there's a massive, well, I won't say massive because these are all massive numbers, but there's a pretty significant drop in the inflow of cash that would come to Tua. So in 2027, he would only be due $45.4 million. So that's almost a $20 million decrease. That is probably the time where, if all things are going well and Tua's played well and he stayed healthy and the team's successful, that 2026 offseason into like the 2027 draft season, that is probably when you would start restructuring the deal for a new contract. So there's some cool things kind of baked into it that protect both Tua and the team. Now, obviously, Tua wins the average annual value thing over Goff by, 100,000. That's a small point that's going to stick out in the online newspaper headlines. But he gets some pretty cool incentives for winning playoff games. He gets an incentive for as many games as he stays healthy. So Kyle Krabs did a great job of breaking this down. There's like a $750,000 per game bonus. So like it's based on the regular season. So for each game Tua plays, he gets 1/17 of that 750,000. So he plays every single regular season game next year, he gets the full 750,000. So you're rewarding him for being able to play and stay healthy. You're rewarding him for team success, winning a playoff game. I think there are other escalators, the further they go, like AFC Championship, Super Bowl. There's more money in there that Tua can get, which makes that average annual value increase to like 57 million. So in a sense, he can knock out Burrow and Lawrence if the team does well, which I think is ultimately what we all want. We've been fans of the logo on the helmet and the name on the front of the jersey long before Tua, and we'll be fans of those things after Tua's done playing football. So to me, I think, and a lot of fans don't really understand how the Dolphins front office works. This is a tremendous job done by Brandon Shore, not necessarily Chris Grier. Chris Grier has the title of general manager. Brandon Shore is in charge of all the football admin, and he's the lead negotiator for any contract the Dolphins do. So Brandon Shore, I'll give him his flowers, did a pretty masterful job of kind of putting together the structure of this deal while leaving enough flexibility for the team to kind of move around that money. So you could do some restructuring with Tua as early as 2025 to try and fit more salary cap space if you're paying out, more money in bonuses to Tua. If you redo Tyreek Hill's deal after the year, which on its face seemed probably like the more palatable thing to do rather than trying to do it in the season, you probably want to roll over as much cap as possible. You could accommodate a Tyreek Hill, reworked deal. You could accommodate a Javon Holland extension. I've heard some whispers that there's already talks going on with David Long, the linebacker, about an extension. I don't know that that would necessarily break the bank, but you get the idea. This contract provides more flexibility, sort of like not on the same scale, but similar to what Patrick Mahomes did in Kansas City. And one of the things that the Chiefs have silently been doing is they've been taking money from the back end of that deal and giving it to Patrick Mahomes through the form of bonuses now. So he actually made like $59.7 million this past season, but no one knows it because they're not checking the contract details. The Chiefs have been moving that money forward in the form of bonuses so it doesn't affect their cap. So there's some cool stuff you can do with it. And I think Brandon Shore did a really nice job of putting that together. There's my long-winded answer and some of the finer points. So Evan, I'll kick it back to you for more thoughts.
No, that's good. I'll give people kind of the broad strokes, and then you can come in and give the details. That's perfect. So yeah, I think by now, and Kyle on his show mentions it's a fire hose of information, especially without a video component for our podcasts when you're talking about all these numbers. So I won't really geek out any more on the numbers. What I will, I lied. I have one more. I think the biggest thing, my biggest take that I really will stand on for this contract, and I will stand on business for this one, is I was at a barbecue yesterday, and one of my real good buddies, he was there, and he's a big Bengals fan. And I was like, hey, did you see the Tua deal? And he kind of like smirked at me, and it just bothered me. I was like, what? He's like, I'm happy you're happy. And we talked about it, and I could tell he thought it was a bad deal. And I understand if people think that we're overpaying Tua, because that just tells me that they probably don't understand where the market is at right now. Because the Jags, by that logic, the Jags overpaid Trevor Lawrence and the Lions overpaid Jared Goff. It just that's where the QB market is now after the salary cap jumped the way it did. And you can debate whether that was because of the Taylor Swift influx of fans and money or why. But the fact is the market exploded because the salary cap went up so much this year. So with that, I think the most important number to look at the value of this contract with Tua and how it affects the team, because that's what matters, right? The dollar amount doesn't matter as much as how much of your salary cap it's eating up, because that's going to impact your ability to sign other players and field a competitive roster. Tua's average percent of cap at signing. So if I had to break this down, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm understanding this is if you look at all the years of Tua's contract and the cap hits that are incurred in those years, the average percent of the team's total cap that it eats up per year is 20.8%, which that's big. That's a fifth of your cap. So you can only sign 5 players if they all took up that cap hit. But the thing is, no one takes up that sort of cap hit except for some wide receiver. Am I understanding that the right way, you think, Kev?
I believe so. And then I'll piggyback off of that with the point that Chris Kaufman made on Twitter. So that's at CK Parrott, if you guys don't know Chris, but I feel like pretty much every Dolphins fan knows him. So if you think about it, we actually kind of first got word that negotiations took place all the way back at the Combine, which kind of is before the league year starts. that influx, that huge cap thing was like a surprise. So I tend to think like one of the reasons this took so long, not that I think it took long, but the fan base seemed to be up in arms until this got done, is you were probably, if you're Brandon Shore and the Dolphins and Chris Grier, your initial position is assuming that the salary cap wasn't going to take as big of a jump as it did. Because like the incremental jumps had been, I think like 6 to 8% pretty consistently for the past like 3 or 4 years. Now all of a sudden you get like a 14% jump in that salary cap money. That kind of changes the market. And I think a lot of these quarterbacks would go back to, who was it last year? Lamar Jackson's extension, kind of seeing that guaranteed money, which is why you start seeing guys like Goff and Trevor Lawrence get what they did, and then ultimately what Tua and Jordan Love got. So I think the team that gets screwed the most by this whole situation is probably Dallas, with what they have to do with Dak Prescott. So because they've waited. Dak Prescott is another athlete's first client, and I think he is represented by David Mulugeta, who's kind of the one guy from Athletes First that you don't want. Like, for instance, Tua's agent is Ryan Williams from Athletes First. Mulugeta is a pretty tough negotiator. He was Christian Wilkins' agent. I believe he's also Jalen Ramsey and Javon Holland's agent. So you've got those guys potentially looming. So just something to keep an eye on. But I think the fact that Miami was able to do this and do it in the manner in which they did it with Athletes First probably lays some good groundwork to start negotiations for other players. And David Long, as I mentioned before, he's also an Athletes First client as well. So just something to keep in mind, like you really couldn't damage things too much if you wanted to get more business done in the future with other guys with this Tua deal. So I guess props to Brandon Shore, props to Tua for being willing to be flexible and kind of help the team out while also having the opportunity to help himself out with the team success, and to Ryan Williams from Athletes First for being amenable to that type of situation. So
yeah, it's a good deal for sure. And just to close the loop, at least it seems like a good deal. We'll see how it ages, but hopefully it should all be good. But to close the loop on the average percent at cap thing, so at 2 o'clock in at 20.8%, that's good for 12th among NFL QBs, which that's where a lot of people would rank in the ESPN rankings. And I think it was a Jeremy Fowler just came out with, where
the executive surveys. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Tua came in right at pretty much 12th, like from the league-wide surveys. So even if you don't think that Tua was deserving of like this huge market contract, I think you need to look at like what a market contract means. And the fact that even if you look at those numbers and your eyes pop out of your head, it's only 12th as far as average cap at signing, which should not preclude the Dolphins from signing other, competitive contracts onto the roster and continuing to build into hopefully being a legitimate contender in the playoffs. So that's the biggest point I had. The last two notes. One was, Kevin, you mentioned the incentive pay for playoff wins.
One is the playoffs incentive stuff you have.
Yep. So there's actually, it's up to this is from Kyle Krabs, up to $9 million in the contract is just alone tied into that incentive pay for wins and then playoff success. So actually one question I had, when you see the 4 years, $212 million, is that incentive pay a part of that, or is that incentive pay stuff that you would add on as he, hopefully accomplishes that?
I believe it's each year. So like if you miss the playoffs, those incentives are off the table. But if you make the playoffs and he gets those, then you get them as part of the contract. And maybe it's something that tolls where, like, say not that I think they would miss, but like say they missed the playoffs this year, maybe that money gets kicked down the road and you can earn more incentives the next season. That'd be something I'd have to look at kind of with finer detail.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense though. So that $9 million-ish in playoff incentives, that's baked into the 212. I guess that's not added on top of it. That's already accounted for.
Yeah, I believe so.
Got it. Okay. And then the last note I had, and this is more of a short-term concern, or actually a perk for the contract, is because of the extension, the Dolphins actually gained about $13.5 million in cap space this season following the extension. So then actually, Kevin, another question. I have two big questions for you. The first one is, you kind of alluded to this already, but with that cap space, because 13.5 this late in the game, that's a lot of money to sign some vets potentially for, more than just camp bodies for training camp. Do you foresee the Dolphins trying to add somebody or kind of save that money for extensions for David Long, for Javon Holland, any or the Tyreek Hill restructure?
Yeah.
What do you foresee? What are you
help me out real quick. I think Barry Jackson had tweeted the number. I was trying to look at like over the cap for how much salary cap space they currently have. And I don't think it's updated since the Tua deal's gone in. So it probably updates Tuesday because that's kind of the official business day of the NFL league office. But I feel like they're at something like close to like 27 or 30 million in cap space.
I think absolutely worst case, they're going to be after the 13.5. I think they'll be working with at least 20. Yeah. Is what I would be thinking.
Because currently looking at the over the cap page I just pulled up, and this is before the Tua thing, they are at 17.7 million in cap space. So if you're gaining more, I think this year is probably a year you would want to roll a lot of that over, because if you're looking at like not necessarily the short term, but like the intermediate horizon, Javon Holland, Jaylen Phillips are both due for deals. You might want to restructure Jalen Ramsey at some point. And then obviously Tyreek Hill, wants not necessarily a new deal. He wants to stay in Miami, which I think is a good thing, just given how much success he's had with Tua. But I think you need to rework that deal to pay him commensurate with what he's actually bringing to the table. So I think if you're going to sign somebody, it's not going to be like a signing that breaks the bank. And like is specific to the O-line, I know this probably isn't what Dolphins fans want to hear. I don't necessarily see them going out and signing an offensive lineman. And like the ones I'm talking about are like Greg Van Roten and Mark Glowinski are probably the top two. I don't see them going out and signing anybody unless they start having like severe performance issues in the joint practices in the preseason games, or if someone on the inside gets hurt and it's like a serious injury that's going to keep them out for, if not the whole season, at least a chunk of the season. I think you got to be smart with this money moving forward to help manage this roster. And you also have to account for the next 2 years. Even though there is that flexibility, Tua's number is going to go up pretty significantly over those next 2 years of the contract in 25 and 26.
Yeah, his cap hit next year is 63 million or something. I think
that's
that
2 years.
So
next year it's like 59, and then it's 63 in 2026.
Yep. So yeah, the numbers jump over time with all these kind of contracts, but yeah, I don't see a cap space either for the team other than the 18 million figure you mentioned. So they could have upwards of 30 or so to work with. I hope they sign an interior offensive lineman. We'll get into that later. But the last question I have, big picture wise, with the Tua deal, and then we'll move on because I know we've taken a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
But I personally, maybe I'm just caught up in the moment because, I was thrilled when we had Tannehill as our quarterback and I was in high school and I was like, oh yeah, 17 is going to take us all the way. Now, I've been on the Tua train since before we drafted him after he won the national championship at Bama, when he came in for Jalen Hurts and won that thing. So I'm thrilled with it, especially looking at the terms of the deal and kind of understanding the contract. But Kev, I know you've been wary, I'll put it that way. You've been wary of the franchise's commitment to Tua in the past. So just big picture wise, if you take maybe the terms of the deal out of it, how does it make you feel that for probably at least the next 3 seasons, we're on the Tua train for sure, like for better or for worse, for sickness or for health? What do you think? Just top down.
Yeah. So I'll give you the 30,000 foot view. So look at it. We know Tua, the best out of him is come these last 2 years under Mike McDaniel, right? So the way that NFL coaches usually get contracts is every 4 years. We've only really had one coach under the Ross era get to a 4th year, and that was Philbin, who lasted all of 4 games into his 4th year. So looking at how many years Mike McDaniel has left, this is his 3rd year of 4. You're probably going to give McDaniel an extension to keep him and Tua together. And I think essentially you're committing to them for 24, 25, and 26. I think that's a fair kind of shake, especially since, at least from McDaniel's perspective, they forced a defensive coordinator on him when he got hired, and Josh Poyer, that he maybe didn't necessarily want. Cough, cough. He didn't want that, but he accepted it to get one of the head coaching jobs. And then you had Fangio, who, not everyone liked him, was pretty good, but now he's gone. So you've had these weird kind of stop and starts with the defense. But I think year 3, we kind of consistently know what we're going to have with the offense. And I think we know, by all accounts, Tua's looked a lot more sharp with some of the things that he's worked on with John Beck in the offseason, and just having more experience in McDaniel's offense. So I'm totally fine with it. I was hoping they would get an extension done. I think the biggest thing for me was, when did they build in the exit ramp? Because, like it or not, he's got an injury history folder that's a couple inches thick with everything he's had, both as a Dolphin and back in Alabama. So I think they did this smart. I think it's fair for Tua. It's fair for the team. Obviously, this is kind of one of the things, having worked for a former NFL player who is in the Hall of Fame, when you have the veterans on the team that kind of know, like, hey, we need this guy, and you hear Tyreek and you hear Teron Armstead and Jalen Ramsey, and guys like Raheem Mostert coming out and saying, like, hey, we need him. Like, they know that Tua drives the success of this team, and he's going to take you as far as you're going to go. So I'm glad it got done. I'm glad it's a fair deal for both parties. And this is probably one of the only cases where you can celebrate, like, neither side, again, air quotes, winning the deal. So I'll be honest, like, I work in a secure facility, so I do not have access to my phone when I'm at work. So I left early on Friday to go to a happy hour with some friends, and I had kind of seen a couple of Twitter accounts that had, like, googly eyes, and I texted someone that I know would know, and he told me that, yeah, the deal's done. So I was pretty happy. Couldn't really celebrate because I was in the middle of the highway in pretty heavy traffic, but I won't lie. For those of you that have listened to the show, I've been keeping a bottle of Lagavulin 12 for a special occasion. Now, I broke into that a couple weeks ago. I broke my own rule because of the promotion I got at work, but I had a nice glass of Lagavulin 12 Friday night after all the Tua stuff came out. So
wow,
that's my answer.
You've come a long way.
Yeah.
Kevin, you're making my heart melt. I remember when we let Flores go, and you said they chose Tua over Flores, and I think I'm afraid they chose wrong. I remember being like, man, I don't think so. I just feel like he's uno, man. He's the one. So we'll see. Anyway, that makes my heart smile. Your heart has grown 3 sizes since Tua came to Miami, Kevin. It makes me happy.
I don't think I was ever a Grinch, though. Before, I was just cautious. Like,
no, you weren't.
So I just think, and I guess it's unfair to Tua, I think he got hyped up coming out of Alabama a lot more than he should have been, just because of the success he had at Alabama. Like, I guess put it another way, like, I saw a couple people compare him to Andrew Luck, and I'm like, I'm sorry, like, no, that's not it. But I think a lot of Dolphins fans bought into that because of certain accounts on Twitter and certain content creators we have in the community kind of drove the hype to an unrealistic level before he ever took a snap for us. And then we went through the whole Flores and Ross saga. Like, he's been through a lot, and I'm glad he's come out the other side and he's performed as well as he has. Ultimately, we still need to get where we want to go. Like, we've got the longest playoff win drought in the league now that Detroit's is over. That's pretty embarrassing. Like, he's a big part of fixing that. So I'm happy, for me to break out the Lagavulin, it's got to be something a little bit special. So that, that gives you my metric of where I was at Friday when I found out the news.
No, and it makes me happy to hear that. I'm just making fun of you. I know you're not really rich, but I agree with really all of that. That was a great breakdown, top down of all of it. I'm glad I asked, because it was an impossible level of hype for him to meet when he came into the league. He was sold as the next thing since sliced bread. And I bought into that a little bit too. So it was hard to watch him struggle a little bit early on, and especially with the injury in the Bengals game 2 seasons ago and everything he's been through. So, yeah, it just seems like a win for everybody, at least short term. But you're right. We still got a long ways to go. We've got to go win a playoff game at some point, and hopefully this is the year we do it. So anyway, I'll close the book on the Tua deal with that, Kev, unless you got anything else, and let us move into some training camp stuff now that camp is officially kicked off.
Yeah, so we'll talk about some training camp previews just in a bit.
DolphinsTalk.com is your one stop for all things Miami Dolphins. With news, commentary, video, interviews, and the Webby Award-winning DolphinsTalk.com daily podcast, DolphinsTalk.com has you covered on all of the latest happenings surrounding the Miami Dolphins. Whether it's training camp, the draft, free agency, or the current Miami Dolphins season, DolphinsTalk.com has it covered. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @DolphinsTalk and to visit the website, DolphinsTalk.com, each and every day. That's DolphinsTalk.com.
So, back for the second installment of our Dolphins Talk Weekly episode here with my co-pilot, Evan Morris. We are going to talk about some of the training camp battles. I did sort of my own solo training camp preview last week. Didn't really talk about the positional battles. So, Evan, let's dive into it. You've highlighted 4 that you are looking at. Let's dive into those and we'll talk about them.
Sure thing. So I should, I guess there is one that I should start with, and that would make it 5. But it's actually such a concern, and I'm going to keep it a surprise, and we're going to cover it in the next segment, which is a little bit of a spoiler, the roster concerns that we each have for 2024. So I'm going to save the first one, and I will jump ahead and start with tight end, which for me is an interesting one because it's not a position that has been super duper involved in this offense in terms of the passing attack. It's super important for blocking in the run game, which we've seen in the past, but passing wise hasn't been a big fixture. That is set to change this year with Johnny Smith. But last year, the team only kept 2 tight ends because Alec Ingold kind of factors into your math at this position here as, you know, the H-back, fullback, and takes a spot there. But there's 4 tight ends, so not counting Ingold at all, that factor or that have a case to make the roster. That's Johnny Smith, Durham Smythe, Julian Hill, and Jody Fortson. So among those 4, I'm expecting, hopefully, at least 2 of them make it. I don't know who is the best bet right now. Probably Johnny and Smythe have the inside track, but that's my first one, Kev. I don't know what you have to say about the tight end room.
Yeah, so people forget Durham Smythe, 3rd most targets, 3rd most catches, 3rd most yards on the team last year after Hill and Waddle. So wasn't a big percentage, but he was like the next guy. So to me, I think he's on the team because he's clearly the best blocker. And you need that functionality for the run game to work.
And I think they just restructured his deal, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he should be on the team the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this year and next year. So I'll specify there. To me, Jonnu Smith almost factors in kind of like, I know he's a tight end, but I think he's almost kind of taking a wide receiver role, with what you're going to do. I know the team loves Julian Hill and loves his blocking. And I think long term, he's probably like the replacement for Durham Smythe when it gets to that time. The other ones like Jody Fortson, everyone talks about being like the big athletic bendy target in the red zone. We've already had one of those in this offense before with Mike Gesicki in the first year of McDaniel. It doesn't really move the needle much for me. Like his film in Kansas City is good, but he's always been hurt. Tanner Connor, I think, is the one that might surprise, especially given the new kickoff rule with his special teams ability. But even then, I think if I were making a roster today, because of Ingold's ability, I'm only keeping Smythe, Smith, and Julian Hill would be my 3 on the roster. I think you probably would see one of the 2, if not both, Fortson and Tanner Connor on the practice squad, though.
Yeah. Okay. I buy all of that for sure. It's too many. This is the thing. This is where the roster's at. We're having these battles, along the roster with some difficult decisions to make on the bottom of the 53. And when you have those hard decisions, that's a good thing. It means that you're fielding a competitive roster. So another room like that, some battles I'm looking for is at the bottom of the secondary. And a big reason why this is a concern, or I guess an area of note especially for me and for Kevin, is because these guys have a lot of impact on special teams. When you get towards the bottom of the secondary, they're going to play a ton of snaps. There might be gunners on punt. They're going to be on kickoff. They're going to be on the field a lot in that phase of the game. So some of the names that I think are fighting for some of those bottom spots, backup safety, safety 4, 5, cornerback 5, 6, whatever, and the special team spots. We've got Patrick McMorris, so the 6th-round pick this year, Mark Perry, a UDFA safety from TCU, and then names guys will know, like Elijah Campbell, Saron Neal, and Nick Needham. That's 5 names right there, and there's some other ones you could probably mention too. And again, I don't think everyone makes it, but I guess one of the questions here I'd ask you, Kevin, is I know Patrick McMorris was the guy that was drafted in the 6th, but with those late day 3 picks, you're not really tied to them. It's really no harm, no foul if they don't make the roster. Who here do you see making the team, especially considering that special teams is going to be something that they have to be good at if they're going to stick on the roster?
Yeah, so I think because of the new kickoff rule, there's 3 players that Miami has on the roster that are kind of exclusively for Danny Crossman outside of like the specialists like kicker, punter, long snapper. I think 2 of those guys are on your list right now with Saron Neal, who was great at it in Buffalo, Elijah Campbell, who's great at it, and then I think the Cam Brown signing, they signed the linebacker from the Giants. I think those are your 3 guys where you're just like, okay, these are my guys. Now, I think Elijah Campbell and Saron Neal both offer you some versatility. Like they've had to play defense before. So I think they've got a leg up on guys like Mark Perry and Jordan Colbert and Patrick McMorris in terms of making the roster. To me, Nick Needham is kind of in an interesting spot because I think at corner, we'll start over. Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, I think Cam Smith. I think all 3 of those guys are locks. Kader Kohou, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty over. Like he's just not been that great, but I also know that he's been asked to do a lot of things over these past 2 years that he probably doesn't have any business being asked to do just because of other injuries. I think the interesting battle is going to be what happens with like Ethan Bonner versus Nick Needham versus Kader Kohou. I think 2 of those 3 are probably on the roster. I know that Ethan Bonner and Cam Smith, like when they've been in base looks, Ethan Bonner and Cam Smith have been like the second team guys at outside corner. I know they've mixed Kohou and Needham in the slot for both the 1s and the 2s, but you're also going to see Jalen Ramsey move into the nickel quite a bit. So does that mean Cam Smith gets more opportunities to play like on the outside? I would much rather have him on the outside than Kader Kohou. So I think there's a little bit of a weird dynamic. And then the other thing that people don't tend to either know or realize is that Nick Needham has cross-trained at safety every year since 2021. That was something that Brian Flores did. You can actually go back. The home game against the Jets in 2021, Javon Holland had to sit out because of COVID. Nick Needham started next to Eric Rowe in that game. So I think Needham, if he's back to full speed, off that Achilles injury from 2 years ago, that positional versatility probably helps him more than like Ethan Bonner, who's just a straight perimeter corner and special teams player. So that's where I kind of think they sit. I think they would probably keep more corners this year than safeties just because you can move Jalen Ramsey around, and Ramsey did have some experience playing safety back at Florida State and with the Rams before he came to Miami. So that's where I kind of look at it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think the key point there to take away is like anytime you get to the bottom of the roster, versatility, I guess, i.e. with special teams, is going to be probably what gets you onto the 53. And even then, you're going to be in danger of like a lot of these names we're mentioning. Like let's say Mark Perry makes the roster because he just is like a beast on special teams somehow. That's a guy he might be in danger when you bring a guy like Bradley Chubb back off of PUP. So they're guys that you probably don't want to get attached to, but you're rooting for because, all these guys are really young guys, except for really Nick Needham, who you're still going to go for because he was a UDFA to begin with, and he's been with the team the whole time. And then a guy like Saron Neal, who's a little bit older. They're the kind of the exception to the rule. But yeah, you need to be able to play teams, I think, to make the roster. And I would say, not to jump too far ahead, but for our next battle, what the bottom of the wide receiver room, probably wide receiver 6, special teams is a big deal here because Braxton Berrios is one of those names that's competing for a spot at the bottom of the room because he fielded punts last year. I think he did kickoffs too last year. Mm-hmm. So between, you've got the top of the room set. You've got Hill, Waddle, and OBJ, probably your top 3. And then you've got Eric Ezukama, Braxton Berrios, River Craycraft, who, for my money, is the new Isaiah Ford. Fans that have been following training camp the last couple of years will know what I'm talking about. And then Malik Washington, they're probably competing for 3 spots. It's four guys for 3 spots. And I think that Berrios gets the leg up on Craycraft because he's more of a special teams guy as far as the returner goes. So I think that you need to be looking at that third phase of the game anytime you look at the bottom of these rooms. And it applies to wide receiver 6 too, is what I would say for both of these battles, secondary and wide receiver.
Yeah, so I think the one thing with Berrios is his contract is a little bit prohibitive to cut him because you incur some dead money. I think the other issue is that the new kickoff rules are in place that might make it more amenable to have someone like a Devon Achane back there with some speed because you don't have to, you're getting through that group of bodies sooner on the field versus them coming from when they're coming from the other 35, yard line where the kicker is. So I think there's some opportunities there for other guys to kind of unseat Berrios, but you can't really move him because of his contract unless you trade him. I think Craycraft is probably the best blocking receiver they have on the roster now. And obviously he knows the system. He was with McDaniel in San Francisco, even before Miami. So there's something of a security blanket there. But if you look at the numbers, he had 12 targets last year and he had 9 catches. And I think like 3 or 4 of those came in week 1. So like wasn't really utilized much. I know Malik Washington has gotten some reps in the slot, kind of in the absence of OBJ, at least at the start of camp. So I think Washington's probably the 4th guy. And then if it's me right now, it's probably Craycraft because of the comfortability, and it's probably Berrios because of his contract being what it is. I think unless Eric Ezukama like really shows something in camp, I have a harder time seeing him make the roster. But if he does, he's probably lopping off River Craycraft. That's kind of where I sit with it. But like, I also wonder like if they keep an extra tight end this year, like Jonnu Smith, obviously is going to be on the team, assuming no injuries, like does Jonnu Smith eat up a spot that would have gone to the 6th receiver? Because one thing they're also doing, and fans are going to see this today, is Devon Achane's getting a lot of work out wide as well. They're trying to find more ways to get him on the field. So I think you really kind of got Achane and Smith eating into some of those snaps that would otherwise go to receivers. It's like, if I remember right, I think Berrios last year caught 27 passes, and then like there was a drop off where like I think Cedric Wilson was right at 20. Like those are pretty ancillary numbers in the grand scheme of things. So it might be a situation like 2 years ago where they kept 5 wide receivers on the roster because of the way Craycraft's contract was structured, and then they brought him back in like week 2 or 3, whatever it was. But it wouldn't surprise me if they only kept 5 at the start of the season, assuming everybody's healthy.
I would be sad to see Eric Ezukama go if he doesn't make it. I mean, just because they seem like they had a role carved out for him early in the season last year, and then the neck injury popped up again, which I don't know. It's just unfortunate for him, especially. So I hope he makes it. But I do like Craycraft. I mean, having the blocking ability is nice. But I think I would take the ceiling. We'll see how camp goes. But I think I would be inclined to take the higher ceiling of Eric Ezukama over sort of the floor player you're getting with Craycraft. Nothing against him because he's played well in spots for the team. But the last one,
I would say too, like probably some of those guys that are cut, you're bringing back on the practice squad. And I think overall, as it relates to these battles, I've started to view, I don't know how big of a baseball fan you are, but like teams can make that 40-man roster. They get 26 guys on the active roster, but there's 14 that you can call up. I think the NFL practice squad, now with some of the more relaxed rules, is getting to be more like that, where you really kind of have like 60 guys, that are playing. You just can't activate everybody on game day.
Oh yeah. I mean, Robbie Chosen was a good example of that last year, right? He was kind of back and forth all year.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with that for sure. And then lastly, again, with the exception of the one that I'm actually most nervous about, is I've got linebacker, because you've got top of the room is set. And I feel pretty good about the top of the room. You've got David Long, who played well last year, Jordan Brooks, who I know that Kev, you were a big fan, or at least really appreciative of all the things that Jerome Baker did for the team. And I agree with that. And as someone who knows more than I respect that opinion. But but he just never, I always felt like it was maybe an upgrade opportunity if you could just find the right person. I'm hopeful that Jordan Brooks might be that person this year. We're going to find out. Maybe I'll be wrong. And Baker's with the Seahawks now. So we just traded linebackers, actually. So we'll see who wins that, really. But those two are set. But then beyond them, I don't know that everybody between Anthony Walker, Channing Tindall, Cam Brown, and Duke Riley is likely to make it, just, again, because of the numbers purely. The one who makes me most nervous, and this goes back to when I did my roster projection for our last show, is Duke Riley, because if you cut him, you actually save $2.5 million against the cap with only $600,000 in dead money. So I think he is in some danger, but that is dependent on if we actually see anything from Channing Tindall. He needs to develop in year 3. Otherwise, there's savings of getting rid of him too. So those guys, Channing Tindall, Duke Riley, I think need to have a good camp. Whereas Cam Brown, probably pretty safe because of the special teams value that you mentioned.
Cam Brown, let's clarify. He's also been working with the edge rushers, not the offensive guys. So, but still, like, the point remains, like, you got to find a spot for him for his special teams abilities, most likely.
Absolutely. So I think he sticks. And then I think Anthony Walker will stick as well. Nothing in his contract makes him all that easy to get rid of. You could do it. I mean, it's a small deal, but it's not like they signed him for pennies. There's no guaranteed money.
And he's been working with the one straight away since David Long is on the PUP right now. So I think that's kind of telling. Like, if Duke Riley had a better standing, he'd probably be the guy rolling with Jordan Brooks. But so far, this is what, day 4 of camp, practice 3, if I got my math right, I think, because they were off yesterday. Anthony Walker's been the guy with Jordan Brooks every time. So I think he's safe. I think those top 3 are actually pretty solid. Like, I feel better about it than having Duke Riley as your third. Duke Riley's always been a pretty good special teamer. That's kind of the thing. Don't ask why, but I ended up finding Danny Crossman's like proprietary special teams grades from last year. Channing Tindall did not do well. He was one of 2 players who had a negative score. So, he's going to have to do something in camp. Otherwise, I think they're probably at a point where they're walking away from him.
Special teams, it's important, especially for these young guys. Even if you're a third-round pick like Channing Tindall, I hope he grows, because again, you have to think his ceiling is higher than Duke Riley's, but you might need Duke Riley for special teams this year. So that's the battle probably comes down to Channing Tindall versus Duke Riley. At least that's my money. That's where I'm looking early on in camp.
Yeah, and I think now that you've got Tua's extension done, you might have other extensions get done. Does Duke Riley's money really matter a whole hell of a lot? Like, I don't think so. I would rather have the quality special teams capability. So if I was picking, assuming no injuries befall anybody, the 4 that I would take to week 1 would be David Long, Jordan Brooks, Anthony Walker, and Duke Riley. And then Cam Brown, I think, is on there somewhere as a special teams guy. So I think Tindall is the guy that's going to be out of a job.
Oh, we'll see. That'd be a little bit of a drama there. It'd be a bummer to cut a 3rd-round pick like that. But yeah, if he doesn't deserve the spot, he doesn't deserve the spot. So that's it for the main battles I'm looking at before getting into the concerns we have for 2024, reasons why the team might not make the playoffs if things go sideways. Anything else for roster battles before we jump into that?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a battle, because I think whoever loses this probably gets right back on the practice squad. But like Chris Brooks versus Jeff Wilson Jr. Is an interesting one, because like they're probably not moving off of Raheem Mostert because they just gave him an extension. Achane and Wright are on their rookie deals. They've kept 4 running backs at least each year under McDaniel. Chris Brooks is kind of the one guy who gives you a bigger physical back. Not that Mostert and Wright aren't physical, but like Chris Brooks is 225 pounds and those guys aren't. Jeff Wilson's had opportunities. He's had some nice games here and there, like the Black Friday game last year, had some moments at the Dallas game, I think at the Browns game 2 years ago, right after the trade. But is he really worth a roster spot? But I also think like you could cut Jeff Wilson and keep him on the practice squad, in case someone gets injured. So that would be my only other real battle at this point. I guess I'm kind of intrigued to see what Skylar Thompson does in year 3 versus Mike White. I am not a big Mike White proponent, so I feel like you need to do better at that position. So curious to see what Skylar does, but those would be kind of the only other two besides the one we're going to talk about now.
Yeah. So to recap, that gives us I almost spoiled it, but we got tight end, the bottom of the secondary, bottom wide receiver, linebacker, and then running back and maybe backup QB as well as spots to watch for battles in training camp. So now into our 3 biggest concerns for 2024. I almost spoiled it. I've been dying to get it out here. I mean, if you've listened to the show before, you probably know. For me, it's unquestionably the interior offensive line. I keep looking at my roster projection for this year and like hoping another name will materialize. Like I literally just wrote in like a blank space for a new player because I just think they just need someone here, and nothing has happened. There's been no movement, and it sounds like I shouldn't expect anything, but I'm just beside myself because right now.
Let's do an exercise. I want to test you. So I've had this confirmed to me by 3 different people who have been at practices so far. Can you guess the starting 5 offensive linemen as the roster sits right now?
Okay.
Not projecting, like who is actually out there on the field, which 5?
And this is assuming that Tehran is working, right?
He is not working, so do not say Tehran Armstead. So give me the 5 guys, left tackle to right tackle.
Okay. Kendall Lamb.
That's your left tackle.
Okay. Oh, God. Okay. Left guard is either I'm going to say Isaiah Wynn.
Nope, he's on PUP.
Oh, I knew that. Sorry. Then it's got to be Liam at left guard.
Nope.
Oh.
Rob Jones is the left guard.
Rob Jones. Okay, Rob Jones is the starting left guard. You're proving my point. But all right, Aaron Brewer, I said center. That's set.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right guard, if we've got Rob Hunt, then maybe it's got to be Jack Driscoll.
Nope, Liam Eichenberg.
Oh, my Lord. Okay. And then right tackle is Austin Jackson.
Yes.
Jeez.
So there's definitely some things that are going to be fluid there because I don't know how real that battle at right guard is between Eichenberg and Driscoll. But the other thing is like both Eichenberg and Driscoll are competing for the backup center spot right now. So like they have no one behind Brewer who is a true center, even among like the only one on the roster who's a true center other than Aaron Brewer is Andrew Meyer, the undrafted kid from UTEP. They've already started cross-training other undrafted free agent guards, notably Ireland Brown and Matthew Jones as centers. So like there's a little bit of stuff in flux with there. I just thought, I wanted to see your gears start spinning at a higher rate when I told you that the starters right now.
Oh, they're spinning for sure. I'm ready to go bust down the door and ask. I mean, I like Chris Grier, but I'm just looking at this and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, if the plan is really to go in to the season with just these guys, I just feel like it's a recipe for disaster. And we said it last year with right tackle because Austin Jackson was not good this time last year yet. He really blossomed. I mean, shoot, like, I guess maybe that happens with Liam this season, or maybe Rob Hunt taps into a level of athleticism that we haven't seen. I just don't. Sorry, yeah, that just shows how much I miss Rob Hunt.
Syndrome. You miss Rob Hunt.
Yeah, I know. So it just really does not give me the warm and fuzzies because I start looking around and I'm like, well, like is Lester Cotton gonna come up and start playing, or like some of these UDFAs, which I know that Meyer and Jones are names that people like. But I just we need people that can contribute from week 1 because Wynn is on PUP. He's hurt all the time, even though I like him when he's healthy. Liam is probably going to Liam this year unless he turns into Austin Jackson incarnate last year, which I just don't trust. I don't know. It's a trust but verify thing for me. Like, I just don't like what I'm seeing right now, and it makes me it agitates me. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Do you feel queasy?
I'm feeling very Philbin queasy about it. So, I could say it better than that.
Yeah. So I think. And this is a stat that Kyle Krabs throws around, and it makes me laugh every time. Lester Cotton played the 3rd most snaps last year out of all the Dolphins offensive linemen. I don't think we want to go through that scenario again, but I also think it shows that Butch Berry can kind of make chicken salad out of chicken shit when he has to. So to me, this goes back to a draft thing. When everybody was all up in arms about Patrick Paul, and I'm like, look, he's got some technique issues. But if this is the guy that Butch Berry's picking out of the whole lot, like that's his guy, aren't you willing to give him a little bit of carte blanche to work with him, just given what he did last year? So the other thing I would say too is people have kind of forgotten this because in the actual games, he's only played as a tackle. But Keon Smith has been cross-trained at guard for the last 3 years. That's something Flores started doing in 2021 when he was a UDFA. McDaniel's staffs have continued it the last 2 years. So I know on the notes that we talked about keeping tackles. I think there's a possibility we keep 5 tackles.
I think they should. I totally think they should.
Keon Smith might be one inside guy. The other thing I wondered too, though, is like, let's say we get, we're a month down the road from now. You still got, like another preseason game to go before you get to the regular season, just based on the timelines where we're at. What happens if Patrick Paul, is that guy? Do you cut Kendall Lamb, who's already said he's going to retire after this year? Would he be amenable to staying on the practice squad as a break glass when an injury happens? Not just emergency, because it will happen. I think there's a number of ways to kind of skin the cat, but I also wonder, like, how bad does it have to look? Because remember, you're not facing Christian Wilkins every day in practice. You're not facing Jalen Phillips or Bradley Chubb. Like, your best edge rushers at this point are probably Ogba and Calais Campbell. At what point do you make a performance-based judgment and go out and look at like a Greg Van Roten or a Mark Lewinsky, or everyone likes to talk about Dalton Reisner, but I think he was one of the guys that was at odds with Butch Berry when they were in Denver together. But at what point do you go out and start looking for a vet? That's kind of where my question mark is. But I think, like, on paper, a line of Armstead, Wynn, Brewer, someone at right guard, and Austin Jackson, is a good line when it's healthy and out there together. I think the question is just how much it's going to be out there together.
It's giving shades of the unicorn line with Juwan. Let's see, it was Juwan James. Oh gosh, who was the tackle from the Chiefs that we signed that was older?
The unicorn line was Brandon Albert, Laramie Tunsil, Mike Pouncey, Jermon Bushrod, and Juwan James, left to right.
That's right.
Remember that?
I was at the Dolphins-Titans game where Juwan James slipped and fell in the shower and couldn't play because
that was Tunsil.
Oh, it was Tunsil.
Tunsil slipped in the shower getting up that morning and couldn't play.
Oh, geez. Anyway, so yeah, the line is just, it's always been a thorn on my side. So your wisdom is appreciated. I hope you're right about all of that. And absolutely, there's still time to add some vet guys later. And I love to hear that Keon Smith can cross-train inside and maybe be kept as a guard, for roster purposes, because I do think they have 5 tackles that they should keep with Teron, Austin Jackson, Patrick Paul, Keon Smith, and Kendall Lamb. So anyway.
My last point I'll talk about the offensive line before we move on is, when you think about this offense, a lot of it is structured with play fakes and motions, and there's rarely times when you're going to be sitting and dropping straight back. Like, even if you look at some of the Dolphins' losses last year, like the Buffalo game on the road, the Ravens game, those games were out of hand. Like, you had no chance. But how many times were they actually in a position in the rest of the games they lost where, like, you're down by 2 scores in the fourth quarter, you can't run the ball against your opponent, you got to throw it 30 times that quarter to win, like just straight dropbacks? Really none. Like, I guess maybe the Chargers game week 1 was about it. So that's the scenario that I think would be the nightmare, is like, if you're just straight dropping back because you can't run, you're down by multiple scores, and Tua's got to throw it. Asking that line to kind of hold up, other than like Teron Armstead, asking that line to hold up one-on-one in pass pro, that's the nightmare scenario, because none of those guys are really great individually aside from Armstead. But how often are we really going to see that scenario play out? So I'm not saying like they've done a great job of building the offensive line or that it's going to be really good, but I think just based on the data we have from the past 2 seasons, we're not going to be in those circumstances very often where like Tua's just getting teed off on left and right. Yeah,
hopefully not. And just so I'm not one of those people who is pointing out problems with no solutions, I am a Greg Van Roten guy. So if I was going to lobby for somebody, pre-cut downs, when we see more names, I would lobby for him. But that brings me to my second concern. I'll try and make this quicker. But it's that we don't have the numbers yet for the roster age, because obviously we're not to cut downs yet for the 53-man roster. But it seems to me like there will be a heavier reliance on older vets this season, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. And I get that it's part of the team's life cycle and the competitive window, because, as you become more competitive, you're probably aging and signing some older veterans to bring experience and more pedigree on the roster. But age also equals money. And I think that the winning must come with that. Like, I think we've got to win a playoff game with the roster if you're going to warrant the roster getting older. And also because these older players are usually going to be more of an injury risk. So following the Calais Campbell signing, the Finns, by my count, are tied for 8th, I think, as far as number of players over the age of 30 on the roster. And week 1 last year, the Finns had the 13th oldest roster in the league. So they're probably about in the middle somewhere. But the big names I'm watching that we really are going to be relying on this season are OBJ, Calais Campbell, Jordan Poyer, Marcus May, Emmanuel Ogbah, and then Ramsey and Fuller are both 29. So those are some of the older guys that are new from last year. And then obviously everyone last year is a year older. So one of my concerns is making sure those guys are healthy and that you're not, I think, leaning too hard on your veteran core. Or if you do, you need to go win this year. You need to go win a playoff game and warrant the fact that the roster is starting to age a little bit. Not too much, but it's something I'm watching. So that's my concern number 2.
I think the majority of those guys have been guys you've brought in because, number one, this is a complex system, and number 2, you've just had to plug holes with like 1-year Band-Aids. Like, I'll be honest, all the safeties besides Javon Holland scare me to death, especially if they have to cover in the deep middle because they're just not athletic. That's going to be a pain point for the defense, I think. Ogbah played pretty well. Like, only played like 25% of the snaps. He only had 1 less sack than Van Ginkel, who, another guy that got overrated by a lot of the fan base. Good player, but not as good as people made him out to be. I think Ogbah is a much better fit for this system, so I'm not as concerned there. Like OBJ, I think for the role that you're going to play him, where you're not relying on him as a starter, is fine. I think Calais Campbell's probably fine. The 2 that really concern me are Poyer and May, especially Poyer, but that's just me.
Yeah, you trust Ogbah more than I do. I hope he bounces back in the system, and I'm sure he can. But I know a lot of his production last year was garbage time type stuff. So of course, I want to see him succeed. It just doesn't make me queasy like the O-line, but it definitely, I don't love it. And then lastly for me, I think these are more tertiary, but edge performance early in the season, considering you probably won't have Bradley Chubb, and I don't think Jaylen Phillips will have a full, he will probably be on a pitch count if he's playing.
Jaylen Phillips won't be the full Jaylen Phillips when he's back. Yeah,
and I think it'd be unfair to expect that from him. And with the Shaq Barrett retirement, it's a bummer. Obviously, wish him all the best, but I think it is probably a downgrade from him to Ogbah. So I think I'm watching the edge guys because you're going to need Calais Campbell, Ogbah, Chop, and Kamara to all play decently well. And then Quentin Bell has gotten some shine recently at camp, so maybe he's someone that can come in and fill some snaps early when they need him. And then lastly, you're going to get into this. I won't take your thunder, but you mentioned it to me before the show. Are the team's woes on the road that's my 3B concern is what I would say. So that's all I've got for my roster concerns.
Well, I'll kind of fly through mine because we're coming up against time here. But like special teams, Miami's coverage metrics were pretty good last year until they weren't. Like you gave up the big touchdown against Baltimore coming out of half, gave the Ravens an easy score. Games out of reach at that point, and you still got 2 whole quarters to play. You lost the division because you let a punt return get returned for a touchdown. You were in that position because you let a field goal get blocked against Tennessee. Like, the dumb stuff on special teams has to stop. Concern number 2 for me would be the defensive staff. Like Anthony Weaver, his 1 year as a D coordinator in the league, not very good. He's teaching a system that he's only been in for 2 years, so how much does he really know it? Joe Barry is his run game coordinator. Don't look at the Packers' run defense from the last 3 years because it's awful. I mean, awful.
Your eyes got so wide when you said that it scares me.
And you don't have Channing Tindall, or excuse me, you don't have Christian Wilkins. I can't believe I said Channing Tindall, but we were talking about. You don't have Christian Wilkins in the middle anymore. You don't have Chubb and Phillips at full strength or at all, maybe for the first chunk of the season. So it's probably a good thing you're playing 4 teams before the bye that have brand new coaching staffs. So I think your offense is going to have to kind of carry you to the bye, which I think is possible. The biggest one to me is road games. So under Mike McDaniel, the Dolphins are 7-12 on the road when you count the playoff games. That's a 370 winning percentage. So if you do that math over 9 road games this year, I'll even round up. That's 4 wins. So that means you're getting 5 losses just baked into the road games based on previous year's performance. So you better be damn good at home. And it seems like they have 1 or 2 clunky games at home every year. I think of the Green Bay game 2 years ago with Tua being concussed. The Titans game obviously was like a microcosm of all the bad that the Dolphins can go through in a game last year. It gets worse, though. The Dolphins are 1-9 in road games against playoff teams. Literally the only road game they've won against a playoff team was the week 2 shootout in Baltimore. Literally Mike McDaniel's second game as head coach. So they've lost 9 straight games on the road to teams against the Ravens. And then I think what makes matters worse is you look at some of the AFC powers, the Chiefs, obviously, Bills, Ravens, Bengals when Burrow's been there. Miami's collectively 2-8 against those teams, 1-7 on the road. Literally the only 2 wins they have are that Baltimore game, and then they won against Buffalo at home the next week. If you want to get there, you either need to win home games and secure yourself home field advantage in the playoffs, or you've got to do what only 2 quarterbacks in the entire AFC have done, and that's go into any other road building and win a game. The only 2 that have done it right now are Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. So that's the mountain you've got to climb. And that's a big concern because Miami just does not play well on the road. So if you can get some road game improvement there, and the other factor is I think under McDaniel, they are now 0-7 in road games where it's 40 degrees or below at kickoff. You got 2 of those at the end of the season with at Cleveland, at the Jets. Those might be pretty critical matchups in the landscape of not only the division, but in the AFC as a whole to try and avoid some of those pitfalls in the playoffs. So that's my number one concern is the road performance of this team. It's kind of the opposite of Tony Sperano, like who could win on the road, but they was like 1-7 at home other than that playoff year. So those are my concerns, but I think that gives us a good spot. We've covered Tua, we've covered the roster battles, we've covered training camp. That's going to do it for us on the show this week. Follow Evan, follow myself on Twitter. Evan, give him your handle.
Yeah, that's Evan Morris 72. Thanks for bearing with me, and I appreciate the patience with all my analysis and getting on my soapbox, Kev. I appreciate you having me on.
And you can follow me at KevinMD4. You can follow the show on Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, Podbean, wherever else you listen to your shows. That's going to do it for us. Fins up. And this episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's caneswear.com, caneswear.com.